Nutrimedical Report follow-up for Dr. Bob Thiel, and we started the other day on 10 things that America is doing to promote and bring about the rise of the Beast Empire, which is the greater European empire. We see Europe being shattered right now. And in fact, it's in this period of weakness when the rise of evil has its greatest chance. Dr. Bob, let's go through some more of the details. And, obviously we're in a period of time that's literally we call the beginning of the end. Not the end of the world, but the end of the age. And the signs are pretty clear that Europe is in total disaster. If you're looking at it from a secular point of view, you'd say the European state is finished, that the European Union is bankrupt, financially and morally bankrupt, and at the stage now it doesn't have really a military to force the world into its will. But things are going to change here very shortly, aren't they?
Yes, we're seeing technologies popping up all over in Europe that the world starts to develop, and we all pay attention to the stuff from China, but so far they haven't been big in terms of certain high-tech arms. They have some things, but they don't. They're certainly not the leader. They're more of a.
They're copycats. They're copycats. They have virtually no capacity to generate anything new and innovative because it's against their culture. In fact, the rise of totalitarianism, which has been there for thousands of years in China, and the latest being communism in the last century, it suppresses innovation, even if they're intelligent. And they're very intelligent people, but they have a unidirectional intelligence. Creativity is something that's suppressed. In fact, I remember talking about one of the large engineering companies that took over a Chinese company with some very highly qualified engineers, and they actually mandated that the engineers have their own bench to do tests and experiment with new procedures and new techniques in engineering. And they came back and after a year and there virtually was nothing done. And the reason is they found out that the engineers were frightened to do any innovation or they'd lose their job or their life. And, of course, they're trying to bring this out. Even the Communist Party is realizing you can't just steal all your inventions from your competitors. You have to have, on-site innovation in China, and when they're quite capable of doing it, but it's been systematically suppressed right from the time they're in school and for multiple generations now.
Well, what's been going on with China, which kind of ties into some of these things, is that a few weeks ago, there's a Chinese senior official for religious affairs. His name is Wang Zuan, Z-U-O-A-N. So if I mispronounce it, anybody can look this up. Anyway, he said that China supports the development of Christianity within the country. Of course, you got to figure out what they're calling Christianity. But then he says, but the construction of Chinese Christian theology should adapt to China's national condition. Okay? So we have a situation where the Chinese know that they've got some issues, okay? Some are trying to tell them that some type of state-controlled religion perhaps will help them with some of the moral corruption problems they have, et cetera. I think it would take way more than that, but this is just what the Chinese are proposing. And what's been interesting since this happened, or most of your listeners know, but I'm sure you know that the Pope flew over to South Korea.
Right.
Now, do you know when he flew over to South Korea, he had to get permission from the Chinese in order to be able to do this?
To fly overflight.
Right, to do that. Now, This happened when John Paul II had tried to do this, I think in 95. The Chinese said no. So they had to divert his plane around because there was no official relationship between Vatican City and China. And so Pope John Paul II had to go a different way, and he did.
Right.
Well, Pope Francis, they let him go through. And according to the press, this is significant. They thought this was very significant. And, of course, yesterday Monday over there, we've been here as well, I guess, the Pope flew back from South Korea, and again, they let him go over the airspace.
Yeah. Well, interesting. There's an interesting parallel between ancient Rome and modern China, because 80% of the new Christians on the planet, and this is every country on earth, 80% of the new Christians are Chinese in China. Not Chinese in Argentina or Ecuador or elsewhere, but Chinese in China. And a large number of them are Roman Catholic. Probably 80% of them are Roman Catholic. Another 20% are various denominations of Protestantism, which means the Catholics are tied in a sense indirectly to Rome. So there's a direct link to Rome and the Catholicism that's practiced in China. It's not Eastern Orthodox Christianity; it's Roman.
Yeah, and the parts I would add on that is China's unique in that they don't allow the Vatican to approve the bishops. The Chinese government does. So there's a rift because there's kind of an underground in China amongst the Roman Catholics. Those who think this is ridiculous and those who go the other direction, those are part of it. But what's been happening is that the Chinese and the Russians, by the way, you mentioned the Eastern Orthodox.
Right.
The Russians have given the Eastern Orthodox a lot more power. So let's say groups of religious faith similar to yours or mine, they consider us a threat. Over in China, there's a group called, I think they're called the Church of the Almighty God.
Right.
Who they're somewhat terroristically inclined. Now, I wasn't going to plug my church directly, but I'll just say this. I'm a member of the Continuing Church of God, and the reason I'm telling you this, a guy who's with us in China actually sent me this email last week and said, look at this name, Church of the Almighty God. Maybe they're going to think we're like this group, which is a terroristic group, as far as we would be concerned. And you've got the reality that the Chinese and the Russians are thinking, we should allow religion, but maybe only the big state religious groups, and we can suppress the others. I mean, that's what they've been doing over, the Eastern Orthodox have been accused of doing, or the Russian Orthodox have been accused of doing over there in Russia. And in China, there's no doubt that they don't like house churches. They have them, but they don't like them. And they certainly don't want to have a lot of those, and they can't control people who actually believe what the Bible teaches. So what they decided to do is, in my opinion, set the stage for the one world religion.
Right, which is why I say it's a parallel with Rome, because Rome absorbed a lot of paganism and changed a lot of the belief systems up to the 3rd century. In fact, it wasn't even called Christianity. That was invented by Domitian, the evil emperor Domitian, to call them Christians or little anointed ones. So in fact, until the 3rd century, with the rise of Constantine and if you want to call it the nationalization of the church, and if you want to call it codifying of dogma, which followed shortly thereafter with the Council of Nicaea, etc., there's a lot of pagan ideas that were brought into the church, and it was significantly paganized over the next 700 years. So as a result, Roman Catholicism didn't resemble the original church of the first 3 centuries.
It's certainly correct. What they ended up with Rome was actually quite different. And what's interesting is most of the holidays, and I could mention them all by name, but I'll spare your listeners that.
Yeah.
But most of the holidays that are on their calendar, one was dedicated to the god Saturn. The other one was renamed after the Babylonian goddess Ishtar.
Right.
And then you've got one to Fauna. You've got one to the goddess Diana, which, by the way, was last week. And there's another big one I was going to mention, but it's not coming to mind. But when you look, what happened was they went to different areas, and they would compromise and say, look, the people really like to have this kind of a party, this kind of celebration. They like to honor their dead this way. They like to do this. So what we need to do is somehow Christianize it. So what they would do, in some cases, one, for example, that comes in February, they picked a guy they considered a Catholic saint who had a day around the same time, just changed his day by a day, and said, okay, you guys can still have all the same celebrations, basically, but we're going to call it something else.
Exactly.
And we find that more and more throughout history, and I think that's what they're setting up to do in China.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's, in fact, a platform to bring about the New World Order, which means a new world religion, a new world financial system, and a new way to control the populations of Earth.
And I want to talk about that when we come back from this break.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome back. And so, Dr. Bob, let's continue. I think a lot of time when people see things really bad, they think it's got to be the end. It's got to be the end. Just like the First World War was the end of war to end all wars, and before you know it, it was 20 years later they were in another war. it's been predicted, going by high-level Masons, that this will be the Third World War. And, of course, by high-level scientists like Einstein, that the Fourth World War would be with sticks and stones if there's any survivors. I think that we're really marching toward a cataclysm here. We have economic foundations being shaken. We have religious foundations being shaken. I think the biggest rise in churches, even though they're under the umbrella of Catholicism, is the house church, which really, to be honest with you, is only Roman Catholic in name, because a lot of the people are reading their Bible and they're getting their own discernment, which means they're open to ask better questions, as I say on the show all the time. They're open to a personal relationship with the Most High God rather than just trying to get themselves close to God with sacraments and good works. Good works without a faith relationship with the Creator is useless. In other words, the good works basically just mean there is a relationship. But if there's no relationship first, the good works don't get you closer to God. All they do is they just, in a sense, you partake of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, and you don't really need God to figure out what is good or evil. And our modern civilization tries to use religion, I call it real lies going on, to control the population. And this is what obviously the Russians and communists are perceiving. If they make a religious alliance with these larger religious groups, they have another means of controlling their own people.
Well, that's what I think, as we discussed on the break, and we'll share this for your listeners, I think China is learning from Russia. Russia goes in there, they decide to connect with the Russian Orthodox Church,
right,
which was highly government-controlled and highly limited, if you will, in what they could do. Well,
right.
Suddenly, they're given influence and power. And
right.
So it becomes a relationship between both. It's more of both sides have political things to gain from it. Some believe, for example, when Vladimir Putin was having certain problems a couple of years ago when he was going up to be elected, that it was because he was endorsed by Patriarch Kirill of Russia, that was one of the reasons why he easily got back in. And
right.
I think Russia has found that it is convenient to use state-dominated religion because sometimes you need the religious leaders to go out and tell people to do something.
Right.
And the other thing we were saying on the break, this did not prevent Russia from going into taking Crimea. I would think that actually may have been one of the reasons they did decide to take it. And you've got the Chinese looking at this, saying, Russia was communist. Russia has endorsed a religion. They can control this religion, and sometimes it helps their leaders. And maybe it can help us.
But it also they realize there's a religious vacuum in all their communist people, and having a so-called state-run religion also is a counter to the Western Chinese rise of extreme Islam, which is really causing them a lot of trouble.
Yeah, especially up in the northwest, I guess.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
I know they're having problems there, and so they're trying to decide what to do. As well as China would like to basically dominate the world. And so they're trying to figure out how to do that. And one thing is, again, the fact that they seem to want to move toward a one-world religion. And they're thinking if they can incorporate a few more things that have the pretense of Christianity associated with them, that one, it might help their people, and two, they may end up having better political control that way. And we talked about this one other time on your show. Mm-hmm. You've got the head of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon.
Ban Ki-moon.
Took me
Ban Ki-moon. By the way, he's a Moon, so which means he's tied in with Sun Mayak-moon, the charismatic leader of the giant megachurch in South Korea.
Well, he's gone out and said that he said in May that the United Nations and the Vatican have the same goals and ideas. So, you've got to wonder about that. And
yeah, exactly.
Well, talking about, the Chinese and their relationships with the Vatican and vice versa, I wrote about a week or two ago that I think one of the reasons why this was allowed, that the Pope was allowed to fly over, et cetera, was because the Pope has gone out and made what I've considered socialist and or communistic or Marxist statements regarding the economy and what he thinks should be done. Now, I don't know if you heard this or not, but it came out yesterday. The Pope has decided to go ahead and lift the restriction to beify a Marxist-leaning bishop by the name of Romero. Now, Romero, his name was actually Oscar Arnulfo Romero y Goldamez, sorry if my Spanish isn't very good. He was from El Salvador. And they wondered about making this guy a saint. But it was blocked because he promoted what's called liberation theology, which they considered to be pretty much Marxist.
Right.
So I don't think it's a coincidence. Some people might think it is, but I don't think it's a coincidence that yesterday, while flying over Chinese airspace, he was over it part of yesterday, he sends out a signal that the beatification ban has been lifted on this guy, and then he goes out and says that it needs to be basically accelerated. Now, he said that at the same time he said that he's open to contact always with the Chinese, and because they have a quote, a true esteem for the Chinese people. Now, the media portrayed these as two separate incidents. Okay, he talked about the Chinese one time, and he lifted the ban on beatification for this Catholic bishop who was a Marxist, basically. And I think it all ties in. I think the Chinese and he keep sending themselves public signals, and the problem is, you never know what happens in private. They don't know, unless you have somebody on the inside, but this is public. He's telling the Chinese publicly, look, I'm supporting a lot of your agenda.
Right.
And I think people don't get it. They see the Pope, they say, oh, look, he's a nice looking old man, and he's trying to be kind, and
yeah, sure.
And we know the Bible warns about one who looks like a lamb and speaks like a dragon. I mean,
right.
a couple of days ago, Youth Day over in Korea, he told the people that are there to turn to Mary, because you got to go to Christ through Mary.
Right.
He says, turn to Mary. Now, I went through the Dewey Rhames Bible, which is a Catholic translation, into English, and I typed in turn to see how many times even the Catholic Bible said to turn to Mary. Of course, the answer is 0, because the record...
Mary is not Jesus' secretary, is what you're saying.
The Bible never says, including Catholic translations, never says to turn to Mary. Never says Mary's an intercessor.
Right.
Says Christ is an intercessor, and that you're supposed to turn to the Lord or turn to God. Never says to turn to Mary. But the Pope is going out there saying this. You've got Koreans, including irreligious ones and non-Catholics, they're eating this up. You got the Chinese.
I think the underlying root of the Marianism is that the underlying root of all paganism is goddess worship. And the ultimate goddess, of course, according to the pagans, is Gaia, or Earth. Rather than treating Earth as a living, if you want to call it, system created by the Creator God that should not be worshipped but should be protected and stewarded, they want to turn into a goddess. As environmentalists. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. So, I see that the Mary worship will be not only Mother Earth, but also the emergence of what I call a new era of genetic engineering. A recent example of that was the two twins that were born through surrogate motherhood in Thailand. The Thais have now outlawed surrogate motherhood. The children were separated. The normal child was taken back by the biological parents to Australia, and the child with Down syndrome with a heart defect was left with the mother, who can't afford to take care of the little child in Thailand. And they've now said in reports that they can literally compose a fetus with as many as 30 plus parents, where different chunks of DNA or chromosomes or mitochondrial DNA can be used. In fact, a process called mitochondrial protofection, where you actually genetically engineer to upgrade the genetics of the mitochondria so the person has an extended lifespan. And also, they've developed a thing called a hack, or human artificial chromosome, where they can literally snap in genes like a cassette to create super soldiers or genetically engineered transhumans. And so the rise of transhumanism, genetically engineered designer fetuses, is here. And in fact, I presented a paper 22 years ago at the Royal Commission on Reproductive Technologies for the Canadian government, 2 papers, one on fetal tissue transplantation, the other was on genetic engineering to create and I dug up that, in fact, George Washington University in America and the University of Palma, Italy, believe it or not far from Rome, were the 2 leading centers for developing artificial uteri to grow fetuses. The research has gone on for 7 decades now, primarily at the Moscow Institute for Biological Research, with American and European and Canadian scientists traveling Aeroflot jets to Moscow to do research, firstly using women and then artificial uteri, going back for decades. So the fact is, we're at that stage now where motherhood, Mother Earth, etc., and the goddess is all tied back into a new super religion. I think it's going to come together to bring paganism, all the apostate forms of various religions on Earth, together into one great super religion around the goddess. And that's where I think this is all going.
We've talked about this in the past, but tying in with all of that, as we mentioned before the break, the Pope told people to turn to Mary, which he's done in the past.
Right.
What's interesting is we talked about a book I wrote called Fatima Shock before.
Right.
I found out that the Taoists refer this to revere a goddess named Tian Ho, and she is called the Queen of Heaven. She's also known as the Mother Goddess. In addition to that, the Chinese have something called Kuan Yin, who's supposed to have lived a human life of extreme self-sacrifice and holiness before she ascended into heaven. Right. She became the celestial goddess of mercy and compassion. And so since she's supposedly went there, she appears as a woman in white to those in need of help. And we now have the situation where, let me read you a quote. Many see no contradiction in praying to Guan Yin, that's this pagan goddess, one day, and on another praying to the Virgin Mary at a Roman Catholic church. Now, this is in China.
Right.
And so we've got a situation now, they already have some kind of a female thing that they're interested in. And, the Bible warns about signs and lying wonders.
Well, do you remember the Asherah poles that were all over Canaan and Israel, too, because they had been apostate? And the goddess Ashtoreth, where we talk about the Asherah poles, they're the same. And the star that was the ancient star, pagan star of or symbol of the god Ashtoreth for the spring human sacrifice on the arms of the bull god Moloch or Baal, which is the consort of Ashtoreth, where the children would be sacrificed, and if they didn't have a child, they'd cook sweetbreads in the shape of like gingerbread men that the Germans did, right? And so they would make these sweetbreads in their ovens, and they'd bring them as a proxy for the child they didn't have with lascivious sex with their non-husband, and they would bring these offerings to Baal with the goddess Ashtoreth honored with a star that we call now the Star of David, which isn't the Star of David, it's the Star of Ashtoreth, or Asherah, which is a phallic symbol that is worshipped all over the world. That's why when you look at the symbol in front of the Egyptian pyramids, the symbol in front of these spires or these skyscrapers are all Asherah symbols. Skyscrapers are Ashtoreth poles.
Well, certainly there's an obelisk in front of St. Peter's.
Right, and all of these symbols are actually symbols of that's why when you look at the actual name of the shape of the Capitol building, it's shaped like a giant uterus. And in fact, you have to look at the ancient symbology of ancient Israel, going right back to the apostasy with the Canaanites, and that Tower of Babel, which is in the plain of Shinar, spread all these thoughts to China and all over the world. They're the same goddesses under different names. That's why the Chinese, they think that this Xinyo is in fact the same as Mary, just under a different name, just like, people probably in Central America or some other group have got a different name, and they will say, oh, well, that's the same. Of course, the Catholics have been very good at the synchronism, where they'll basically say, oh, well, we'll accept that pagan belief system in Indonesia or in the Philippines, which is what they've done, animism, because they're very adaptive to the local pagan religions, because Roman Catholicism in its core is pagan.
Well, last week the Pope told the bishops over there to be very, to be sensitive to their culture. Said something about not betraying their Roman Catholic roots, and I read about that, and I'm thinking, okay, let's see. When they went to Mexico, they ended up with things like Day of the Dead type of ceremonies, which certainly didn't come from the Bible.
Exactly.
When they went into, we have some Druid things that were adopted when they were over in the British Isles. We have other winter things that were adopted when they were in Germany and other parts of the world. So they've done that in the past, and I think that they'll find some way to find some saint or somebody or something that will tie into some of the things that the Chinese are comfortable with.
Yeah. Every culture has what we call heroes and heroines through the culture that they can deify, and you can even do it posthumously to deify them and bring them into the fold of Christianity. Because you have to understand the World Council of Churches is primarily founded by the Roman Catholic Church. It considers itself the mother of all religions and all faith on earth. Well,
as your listeners may or may not know, they actually, outside of a building for they name it after John, right, in the Vatican, outside of Vatican City in Rome, they have that big thing in Latin that says it is the mother of all the churches of the world. It's there. So if anyone thinks, oh, this is some kind of weird conspiracy theory thing,
no.
I've been there multiple times. I have pictures of it, and I know it's there because I've seen it. And actually, and that's one thing a lot of people don't realize, is that the Cathedral of Rome, by the way, of the Church of Rome, is not in the Vatican. Is not in Vatican City. It's down the street at this place for John. That's actually where they claim they have their succession. By the way, is actually from there. So some who will say, well, the Vatican can't be the city of seven hills or something because it's just one hill out the side. It's like, oh, no, their cathedral is right in the middle of the seven hills of Rome, or toward the edge of one anyway.
Right.
Now, as far as we mentioned, some of the things that the U.S. has done in order to kind of make this kind of stuff happen. Well, as you may know, I think your listeners may know this, and I'm sure you know this. Barack Obama went to visit the Pope earlier this year. He said that they shared the same objectives in terms of basically one world or ecumenical unity or dialogue, whatever term you want, and that they also had a similar vision for the poor, which is basically, in my opinion, doublespeak for talking about this idea of going toward a socialist or communistic agenda.
Oh yeah, the Vatican is totally. See, socialism and communism are two sides of the same coin. It means central control of means of economy, central control of thought patterns, central control of creativity, everything. And host churches are not part of that.
Right.
Up until now, we have been losing the war.
Yeah, back, and Dr. Bob, an interesting dialogue on the break. Where would you like to bring this in this last segment? Because I think people should get a kind of perspective that we can see dimly, but less dimly every day, as to where this is all going. I know there's a lot of conflict in the world, in Gaza, in the Middle East, but these dark days are actually to precede a false period of light and a false period of peace and a false religion that'll become global. And I think the globalism is going to be tied directly to the Vatican's move toward a form of global ecumenism where, dogma schmagma, they'll just move forward to create an amalgam of all different religions with central points like goddess worship and globalism and save the planet, etc. To bring everything kind of under one umbrella, tied to control of population while the environment of planet Earth goes down the toilet and where the economy disappears, and we have a totalitarian biometric world that's genetically engineered, and the population are put under an even heavier burden or thumb, not only by a controlling world government, but by controlling world religions that are all false.
Well, let me try to address all that. And basically what's going... First I'll talk about what's going on in a couple parts of the world. You've got Boko Haram out there who's going around killing anybody they can get a hold of who won't convert.
In Nigeria, yeah. Boko Haram in Nigeria, which is, by the way, near Lagos, which is a big new area where Ebola is spreading like crazy. So Boko Haram, yeah.
So you've got them out there. Then you've got the Islamic State, otherwise known as ISIL, because they were called the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And so you've got this going on. And what's going to happen is the West is going to look at this, and they're being horrified by it. So what I see happening with this is we're going to see an emergence of people considered more moderate in terms of Islam. And so when the King of the South, that the Bible talks about forming, starts to form, they're going to say, look, we can keep this under, we can do this, we can keep the extremists under control. The first time I was in Turkey, which was it was over 20 years ago.
Right.
They even told us there that the problem you have in the Middle East is that we Turks aren't running it anymore. When we ran it, we didn't have these problems.
They're very pragmatic, which is why even when they drink wine, which was against the Quran, they say, hey, this is Turkey. So, in other words, the pragmatism of the Turks and the Ottoman Empire, they believe, is the reason why the rise of extreme Islam is because the Turks and the Ottoman Empire are controlling the things.
Right. So you've got where all this is going to lead to is some kind of a false peace deal, but also the rise of an Islamic confederation, at least a confederation of nations that call themselves Islamic. Now, they also tend to revere Mary, by the way, and Mary's mentioned in the Quran more than Jesus by name. So they're looking for some of this kind of stuff. Then you've got the United Nations, who's gone out and said, look, the only way we're going to get peace on earth is if the world religions get together, religious leaders get together, and come up with some agreement, and basically say that we're all going to go to the same place, and we all teach that people should be good, and they'll compromise whatever they need to do, and that's where we're leading toward. The Bible talks about this beast power government rising up. It says in Revelation 13:4 and 13:8 that all the world will worship the beast, and so we've got somehow it's got to happen. Now you've brought up Catholicism a few times, and while I believe that they're going to use that name, ultimately, I believe that the final head of that group is going to betray that church. And,
of course. Yeah.
And it talks about that in Revelation 17 and 17. And when that happens, we may see something you and I were talking about, the break moving toward more of a goddess situation. And we've got, again, the Taoists, you got the Buddhists, you've got the Chinese, who all have this in their faith. You've got the Muslims who've got their version of Mary plus their Muhammad's daughter Fatima as part of this. So we see more and more of these pieces lining up to lead in that direction. But as I was saying at the beginning of this interview today, the media doesn't connect any of this. They actually think it's all good.
Well, I think that the ultimate goal will be the rise of an Islamic leader, which is the Imam Mahdi, combining with the Vatican's moves there and the geopolitical moves of people like Mr. Putin, who understood the need for religion. Now we have political morons like Obama, who pretended to be a Christian, which is a very faint shadow of Christianity, when he actually is very apologetic toward Masons and high-level Muslims, including his cousins in Kenya, who were terrorists. But I think what you're seeing is that the smart political leaders are realizing that they can use religion as a weapon to control the populations. Europe hasn't caught on to that yet, and I think Europe is reaching the bottom of their, right now I talk to my friends who are European, and they tell me the only reason why they have these commissions for churches is to maintain the buildings as architectural heirlooms for tourism. But the religion as it stands in Europe is dead. By and large, religion and churches are dead as a doornail in Europe.
Oh, we're going to see a revival of something going on over there, and it might take. Well, Scripture talks about signs and lying wonders and all those kind of things rising up.
It'll take what I think it's going to take is you're going to start to see the devastation of the death of planet Earth, which is already in process. And as that devastation spreads with famine and pestilence, like Ebola we call the Red Death, and famine which is now gripping us today, not next year or the year after, today, we have massive commodity shortages, and the price of meat and food is going to go through the ceiling this fall and next year.
Meat's got to go up because of the droughts.
Yeah, and what will happen is the destruction of the ozone layer, the use of monocrops like genetically modified food, even in places like India. The cost of these seeds is so high that 275,000 farmers have already committed suicide. Plus the GMO cotton, the material on it, the oils in the cotton actually cause suicide. If you actually have it transdermally on your skin, it makes you so agitated you commit suicide. And it causes a very bad dermatitis. So what I think is going to happen is you're going to start seeing massive rejection of genetically modified food. You're going to see massive shortages of food in general because of ozone layer destruction and the destruction of the oceans. The Pacific Ocean is dying. The coastal intertidal region, now we've had Dana Durnford on last week, and he'll be back on the program after he does his next exploration up along the Georgia Strait and internal coastline of British Columbia. I think as people start to grasp that this is not a conspiracy theory, but there really is a period of an extinction level event in progress right now, hastened by geoengineering the upper atmosphere to protect against incoming missiles, hastened by Fukushima Daiichi destroying the ozone layer, hastened by genetically modified foods and the dumping of toxins in the ocean, so we have 10,000 to 20,000 dead zones with millions of square miles. I think that people don't grasp that I don't believe this garbage about the carrying capacity of the Earth or peak oil. That's a pile of garbage. But I do promote the fact, as an oceanographer going back over 40-some years, and one of the original members of Greenpeace before they get taken over by the globalists, we're heading toward a cataclysm of peak oxygen, where if we keep destroying the oceans and cutting down the forests and destroying the biological capacity of the Earth to convert carbon dioxide to oxygen, that human beings won't and mammals won't be able to live. It was said during the time when the great destructions occurred on planet Earth, the oxygen went from 2 atmospheres and 35% with the dinosaurs down to less than 5% and 1 atmosphere or less. And that's one of the primary things besides the temperature changes that killed them. They couldn't exist. Today, you couldn't have a dino park built, even genetically engineering from amber dinosaurs, because they couldn't exist on our planet.
Well, precisely how all of the devastation will be played out, I believe GMOs are going to play a role. But, I
don't know the sequence, but I can tell you the list. First, right. You'll see collapse of food supply, especially seafood. You'll see massive increase in illness. You'll see massive increase in injuries of people during the middle part of the day going out, and now ultraviolet light damage. If you go down the middle of the day without proper sun protection clothing, we're not talking about sun protection wipe-on, even titanium dioxide, you're going to get injured. And if you don't wear eye protection, you're going to get retinal and cataract and pterygian eye damage to the sclera of your eyes. That's today. This isn't theory, it's right now. So the problem is it's not open to anybody's opinion anymore. It just is. And I think that when you see famine, spread, and pestilence, which, by the way, our public health policies are going to promote Ebola and other viruses that will be much easier to spread, like some version of avian or swine flu. When these viruses emerge, which they will, with a weakened population, they'll spread like wildfire. And I see this happening starting this year. It'll continue to crescendo over the next 3 to 5 years, and the population will cry out to Mother Earth and to world religion to save them from devastations that are coming. And I think that's where you'll see the rise of Europe with new technology, nuclear fusion energy with the helium-3 tokamak fusion reactor. This is stardust from the sun, from the solar wind, that lands on the moon because we have a magnetosphere to protect us from. So they have 100 to 500,000 times more helium-3 on the moon's surface in crystals than we do on Earth. That's why they mine it there. And we're heading toward the time of the end, and it's the beginning of the end. It really is. This is not open.
Beginning of sorrows and
it's the beginning of the end. And that sequence, I can't tell you exactly what will happen first or second, but I can tell you what's going to happen in terms of the list. It's going to be ugly, and it's happening now.
Except Jesus will return and fix it.
Absolutely, Jesus will return.
How many good people